Welcome back, Cal listeners. This is Methodical Millions, where you can better your future and better yourself. Cal, we've got another awesome guest with us today. So everyone listening, please welcome Bobby Fijan, all the way from Philly. Bobby, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. I'd like to start with a question. What gets you excited about life?
What gets me excited about life? Well, there's the business answer, and then there's the kind of more like personal answer. So on the personal side, it's certainly my family. My kids are growing up, and they're turning from little kids to being they always were, but it's more apparent that they're like real people. So they have ideas and opinions and thoughts, and that is really cool to see every day, and to I guess fast forward my mind on where that's going to go in the future. And then in terms of business, what am I excited about? I've become extremely excited and intellectually invigorated through the idea exchange of the Twitter community. I think that's what I've come to really be excited about. I have my own little niche on things that I like talking about, but I have not encountered so many interesting ideas ever before professionally. And I'd say the degree to which I've learned and gotten better as an investor myself, had some of my ideas tested and refined, makes me extremely excited professionally going forward.
Yeah, totally. That's how we found Bobby, by the way. I find pretty much all of our guests on Twitter. And yeah, what is it about Twitter that makes it so slept on? Like, I don't think a lot of people in general talk about Twitter, but when people find it, they love it. It's clearly my favorite. YouTube's a close second for consuming in terms of the engagement and like the people you meet. It's wild, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, until the summer of 2020, I used Twitter exclusively for, following like breaking news in sports, and just following some like political news stuff, like, whether it was local journalism on this is going to be proved, that isn't, or maybe some bigger stuff. But I was purely just a consumer. And I think I sort of like found a really good community. So I think like the real estate community within Twitter is particularly good. I'm not as familiar with some of the other ones. So I guess to circle all the way back to answer your question, I guess why I think Twitter is particularly good is that if you can find the right community, mainly among like curating your feed well and who you follow and who you don't, and honestly, frankly, tuning out a lot of the big traffic stuff that happens on Twitter, then you find it to be a very helpful place where people share real knowledge and experience and expertise. So that's what I think makes like the real estate Twitter community particularly good, is that there is knowledge sharing, and there's also within the very specific of like the real estate Twitter community, which is, I'd say, kind of defined by like the people who are some of the larger accounts at the top. There are unwritten rules that end up being followed largely about not jumping down each other's throat, kindness, vigorous debate, and not dunking on other people. So obviously, there are other parts of Twitter that violate those all the time, but within certain small subsets, you can find communities that abide by rules like that, which makes, to me, which is what like unleashes the power of the internet, of people from each different areas like saying like, this is how I do things, this is how I do things, and then everyone gets better. So that's what I think makes the community that I'm involved in at Twitter particularly great.
Yeah, right on. Do you have a real estate background yourself? What's your professional background look like, and what are you working on today?
So I got involved in real estate in 2011. I was in grad school for applied math, and met some other guys. One of them was a good friend from undergrad, and he and two other people said they were starting a real estate development company in the basement of a church that they're going to try to convert into apartments or do development on. And I was new enough to say like, okay, I think I can help a bit, because I wasn't doing any research projects that summer. And by the end of the summer, I told my wife that's what I wanted to do. So I've been involved in development since then. That was a really interesting time to get involved in development. It was much easier to find deals, much more difficult to find capital. So you could put deals under agreement for soft deposits, which there's no way you can do that now.
Yeah.
And I love the guys I worked with. it was a kind of a situation where, too naive and too young to like not know better. Two of the guys were older and certainly knew what they were doing on development more. Myself and my other friend were both like young and smart and had a good like educational background that showed well. And we were pretty quant heavy, so we knew how to model things well and be creative, that stuff. So it ended up being just like a really fun team. So the four of us together built a bunch of apartments in the Philadelphia area, and did some gut rehab of office to residential and conversion of the church seminary into apartments and things like that. And so we built about 1,000, 1,200 units, kind of depending on how you count student housing units, but that's what we did. And then in 2018, I took a sabbatical, and then started a property technology company. That's a construction SaaS software company. That company's still going. And at the beginning of 2021, I started working on what I'm now working on, using data to optimize floor plans. So kind of tying this back to Twitter a bit, that has become a business. I don't want to say exclusively through, but a lot through the crucible of Twitter, of putting things out there in the ways that I think about them, and then getting different feedback on how it can become better. So at the moment, what I do is I help apartment developers fine tune interior attributes in order to maximize rent per square foot of new construction apartment buildings.
That's amazing. I can see a lot of things
Thanks.
come together. So
Yeah.
you're of course super brilliant, and I love how, a recurring theme I see in the most successful people are that they take their existing skills as a foundation, a unique outlook on the world, apply it to something they're excited about. And, you mentioned naive, but it's trying and learning and
Mm.
wanting to, the humility to learn. And I think if you're surrounded by that, it's like, why wouldn't I do it? And I think you take away the barriers that maybe not necessarily experience, because the people who do it well, but the people who don't even try, they're going to
Mhm.
come up with reasons why not to. And that holds them back. Right. So,
I think it's so well put to say that like there's different. Well, there's a lot of books that come out that are about it. I think there's that one book that I read last year called like Range, which is about like how people coming from different backgrounds can make them better as like generalists, or why generalists can solve different problems better. But I think that, well, for me, that was from my background in math and also just my interest in sports. That's kind of how I fell into and I've always thought about like real estate and now like floor plan data. And that has just been a really helpful lens. And it also, to me, makes it much more of a game and something like fun. So, like, one of the reasons why floor plans are so bad from the data side is because, like, we just don't measure the right things. And you're always going to optimize for things that are wrong. From what you mentioned in our pre-call about, like, knowing about the Flyers, I take it that you're a hockey fan. All different sports have had an ascendance of kind of like stats-based, like, fine-tuning or optimization. But earlier on in that sort of like change, the limitation of only measuring certain things meant that people would say, just do more of that, despite kind of like common sense that tells you it's not the case. So I didn't play hockey, but I played soccer. And I remember as kind of quote unquote soccer stats, when people would say like, well, you need 9 shots to get a goal, or 10, whatever it is. And the quality doesn't matter. Just like put it on goal, right? Now, on one hand, that makes sense from a stats perspective, and you can chart like more shots will equal like more goals. But obviously, quality matters too. And if you don't have a way to like characterize like good chances, then you're just going to have like large volume of like really crappy shots, which is one thing you see happen. So for both sports, and I hope on the cusp, like for real estate, measuring things appropriately mixed with common sense leads to much better outcomes rather than just more garbage.
yeah, there's a analogy like that in the car business. So, car manufacturers, have optimized for what's called a overlap collision. So, two cars in a highway just barely hitting each other in the corners is like super dangerous. And,
Right.
cars have reinforced that specific area so they can go on and say we're 5-star crash tested. And, you know, that doesn't account for blind spots. So, speaking of that in pretty much any field, if you focus on what other people tell you, which is this is the way to do things, the conventional wisdom, there's not going to be any innovation in the space.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
I find this very interesting. How do we bottle how you think? And then, how can people, try and kind of coach that in themselves? How do you say you get creative and you innovate yourself?
I think by constantly trying to like layer in common sense and talk to people who are not familiar with it. And that's one of the reasons why I've found Twitter to be so useful. And that you'll have Twitter is very good at getting opinions, and there's people who you can find who are generally intelligent. And I think often people within an industry can say like, we do things this way. Why? Because, and there's lots of different very good reasons why it happens. I think it's useful to have outside voices sort of check those baseline assumptions. Now, obviously, it gets problematic when you just have people from the outside say like, "Oh, we're going to revolutionize this." I've talked to a bunch of different people within like the property technology space who say like, "Let's just do this thing," because they don't know enough of the industry. Like, you do have to have some healthy respect at a minimum, and some level of expertise in order to be able to change an industry. But for me, having more common sense and talking to other people who are helpful. I've trained several dozen analysts, both people who became development managers and people who became financial analysts. And the one thing I would always tell them in starting off is when you're looking at like valuing a building, there's lots of different like financial levers you can pull, and it can turn into like a really complicated financial product. But at the end of the day, like just remember that like, it's a very simple thing, right? Like, and I think people lose it when they get away from how straightforward some of these different valuations are. Again, taking this back to like floor plans or rental pricing, one of the main problems you're trying to solve when you're building an apartment building is like, what are rents going to be, right? I'm going to build this building at this location. Maybe there's a direct comp across the street, like where we are going to copy it exactly. Usually that doesn't happen. Even if that's the case, the units might be slightly different. The finishes might be slightly different. So, you put your finger in there and you say like, what are the rents going to be? Well, there's lots of different ways you can try and approach it from like a data problem. And obviously, like I'm trying to add to that with floor plan data. But at the end of the day, like I think you get 90% of the value saying like, I'll just imagine I'm a renter. What would I pay? Is the difference between these two different things? Or how can I find like what the imaginary renter would think? And just starting from those kind of common sense ways, and then layering on top like complex math and financing and options and that sort of interest rate fluctuations and things that you would need to do. But at the core of it, boil problems down to like their essence and what is really driving the needle and what isn't. That's
Yeah,
what I find helpful.
right on. So here's an idea. So,
Sure.
some people in the tech space will do like a web page, a landing page to, gauge demand, and will
Yep.
say, "Hey, sign up." So could you, 3D model one of your floor plans, and I guess you kind of like visualize it with actual like pictures. It's all conceptual on computer, but I think
Yep.
software is good enough. And then could you throw it on like, I don't know what you guys use. We use Kijiji in Canada, but like a Craigslist or whatever, and wherever
Yep.
people PadMapper, or is it Zumper? I guess people use. So can you throw those on there to test before you build and just see if you get leads and if people like it, or is that kind of too much cart before the horse?
Um, I think that would be an incredible thing to try. I think like A/B testing and thinking about apartments as like a product, which is inherently like what is you're doing. Like, do people want to buy this? That's like product level thinking. That isn't done in apartments at all. So I don't. I think it would be difficult to pull off actually, but I think it's certainly worth the effort. There should definitely be a much more robust market for like real surveys. There are some companies that run them, and in fact, interesting. I have a story about one that I did a little bit something like too. So I'd say it's hard. If you don't mind, I can share a story about how I did something kind of similar. It might be kind of fun.
Please go
Um,
ahead.
Yeah, please go ahead.
we're working on a project that was student housing, and it was a big public university, and we were going to build something that was newer and nicer than anything else that had built in the market. So, when you think about where pricing is, data can only tell you like where something falls within things that exist, right? If you're going to build something new, you have to just imply that the demand curve goes like up and to the right, and that if this many people are willing to pay $800, then not all, but some people are willing to pay $1,000. But that's all just implied. So there was one other like comp in the area that was like a university-owned property that was new, and so the main question that came to like us and our capital providers was like, are there more than that? Like, did they capture all the demand, or was there so much demand that like this one building filled, and is there more people above that? And we were basically building a building that was going to be about the same size. So logically, it could be like a fairly big lift to say like, that at least there's double the number of people. There's double the demand for this one building, for this new one. So the deal went along. There was always this kind of inherent problem. And at the end of the day, there were a few different parts of the deal that some numbers came back higher on costs, et cetera. So there's always wins and losses. We were going through due diligence. But the end of it, like both us and our capital partner were saying, like, we're just not sure enough there's a deep enough market for this product. So I was thinking, like, well, how can I prove this? And I was like, all right. I went to the bank and I took out $1,000 in cash in $5 bills. And I went and I stood next to the lunch carts. And I said, I will give anyone a $5 bill for a 5-question survey. I put like the university's logo on top of it, so it looked like real. And the questions were basically designed to elicit, like, if people had applied for this specific building and had not gotten in, which was proven that they were willing to like pay that amount for a similar product. And then secondly, ask someone if they didn't apply for it, if it had been for-profit housing, right? Which isn't going to have the same kind of rules and restrictions that like an on-campus housing would be, because you can't drink in a dorm, et cetera. So maybe there's even more people who would want. So with these 5 questions, and I think I designed them decently well, we proved that like 40% of the people of the 200 were willing to do that. And in a 200 is actually, it's not a perfect sample size, it's not a perfect data set, but like it is enough to say with like pretty strong degree of accuracy that 200 represents like 15,000, like relatively well. And so from that, we showed that there was the demand. The deal still ended up dying later for other reasons, but that little test saved the deal temporarily.
I absolutely love that story. Super brilliant. And yeah, I'm not like, it's really opening my eyes to how important data is. And,
Yep.
how do you take someone who doesn't deal with data every day to,
Yep.
get them warm to the idea and to what to look for pretty much in, like, we can use real estate, but just in anything.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they start without doing
Well,
like a full course, I guess?
that's where I, tongue in cheek, that's where I call myself like the Bill James of floor plans, and not everyone knows who that is, but the people within sports data do. So I find sports to be the easiest example of that. And those are the ones I use all the time, of saying like, there's a difference between these two different things. And you need to visually chart them to know the difference and then respond accordingly, right? So in American football, there's a big difference between a 75-yard pass that's thrown all the way in the air, like frozen rope, like Pat Mahomes throws it and hits someone in the stride and it's a touchdown, and like a screen pass where the running back basically does all the work and runs the same amount of time. But if you only chart that as a 75-yard completion, then you would miss what led to it. Again, similar like in hockey. I mean, hockey has been more advanced for a while, and that they have counted the last 2 passes as an assist, right? Basketball has not. They've had to invent new statistics and measure new things to say like, well, should we in basketball should they add should they change the definition of an assist to more of like a hockey style one? And I think that people understand, certainly within like real estate, understand like that measuring things appropriately and in more detail will have like dramatic impacts. Like I think the other obvious one is like in the NBA for like 3-point shooting, right? Like corner threes, the rules of basketball like haven't changed that dramatically over the past like 30 years. There have been some things like hand check rules and the way that you can defend and other stuff like that, but those are not like dramatic. But the way the game is played has changed a lot, and that's because people now know with data that like a corner 3 is worth more than almost anything other than like a slam dunk. And the shot didn't get any easier, and everyone knew that it was a relatively easy shot to make. But now like we know that because there is data, and there's also the way that data is visualized. So you can actually see like the heat map of like where value comes from on the court. And that is the way that I have found to explain why floor plan data is important, or why data in general is so impactful.
I gotta say, I am personally quite a big fan about data and analytics.
Yep.
I have no experience, but I do see the real power of it. How, we talked about before in our podcast about, even when it comes to your investing or anything in life, whether it was just your expenses, tracking your expenses, or, tracking your progress when you're exercising,
Yep.
All these things, come into play when you gather the data and really are able to analyze them and sort them in a way that you can read them and understand them. To me, it gets me quite excited. So
Yes.
what you're doing is something I've never actually heard of, because maybe perhaps I'm not that well versed when it comes to real estate. But so do you mind sharing with us a bit more on, like, do you use a proprietary software tool, or is it something quite widespread in real estate, or is it something that you kind of developed? Because I've never heard of it personally.
No, it's definitely something I've developed. So on one hand, I don't think that it's that groundbreaking. In my opinion, it is taking like principles that have been applied elsewhere, and applying them to interior real estate data attributes. The health one is a great one, great example, right? For a while, people would track like BMI, right? It's like, well, let's maximize to make a BMI better. Well, if you only look at that, then you would say that someone who's in great shape, based on like body fat percentage, is unhealthy, right? So in a similar thing, I think what's one thing that's really important in first acknowledging what data is, like, it's similar to, they say, like, you will get more of what you measure, right? If you optimize something, if you say like this is the most important thing, it's like your OKRs or whatever it is you're going to say is the most important thing. Like, you have to be very careful as a company and as a person, like what you're measuring for, because you'll make that better despite the negative consequences of everything else that you aren't measuring. And then the other one is that, like, you are limited in making conclusions about things. It's kind of the exact opposite. You're limited in making conclusions about things you haven't measured. And like, I'd also say that, like, the human mind is incredibly complex and very good at making subconsciously a lot of these decisions, these cost benefit analysis decisions, like very, very rapidly. But on the data side, where I am an expert, I'd say I have taken the same approach that had been done within sports and is applying that to floor plans and interior unit data attributes. So, like, what I do have is a proprietary method and data set, but I'm open on Twitter and elsewhere that the way in which I do it is just a lot of like really hard, laborious, annoying work, to look at and analyze existing floor plans and to track about 120 different variables inside and say what exists in each one of these different apartments. So at the moment, the only data that is used that generally tracks what is inside an apartment is the unit type, which is usually, the number of bedrooms. And again, as I get into Twitter a lot, what a bedroom is and what a bedroom isn't is different from like area to area, whether there's a window or not. And the number of square feet. And there might be some data on like whether it has nice finishes or not. So that I just find to be insufficient. And so to me, my method is to expand that list of variables to describe the inner space, to do something that each person already does automatically. Like, we've all been into someone's house or someone's apartment that was 600 square feet that was great. And we've all been to a 600 square foot apartment that is garbage. But if there's no way in data to describe why one is good and why one is bad, then you can't fix it other than with just opinions. And the problem with opinions is, if something can't be modeled financially in Excel, then it can't really take off, because there's no way for a lender or a capital allocator to give credit to that. If someone's saying like, my floor plans are better, so I should get higher rent. It's like, well, why? How can you show me? So you have to be able to demonstrate it and back it up. And that's where the annoying work of like logging attributes into a large data set is what I've done. And that process keeps going, and I keep adding to that. And again, kind of bringing it back to the sports analogy, it's why there are certain statistics that only exist going back to a certain period of time, because it would be a lot of annoying work to go back for someone to manually like observe all these old games and like dish out advanced statistics. So people don't do it. And that's basically what I've done on floor plans, is like looked at and developed some software around it to make it a little bit faster. But it's not automated by any means, because that's extremely hard to go back and label an individual floor plan with a lot of different attributes. And then it becomes a relatively straightforward data science problem. So that's my method.
That's awesome. So who's your biggest customer? Is it strictly apartment building style endeavors, or would you eventually target people who build custom homes? What are your thoughts on that?
So first, I'd say it's only rentals. I do think that there is a usefulness in information from apartments to homes rather than the other way. because homes obviously tend to be much more customized. And so the output, which is price, is going to be a little more dependent on things that were done into the unit, maybe to the specific like owner or builder's desires, whereas apartments are more monolithic, which makes them, in my opinion, a better data set. And the other thing that makes homes much more difficult on the dimensional interior attribute side, which is one of the reasons why no one has done it and why I haven't tried, is floor plans do not exist in the same like easily viewable way that they do in apartments. So apartments don't have that many photos, and houses don't have that many floor plans. It is an incredibly difficult computer vision problem to try and stitch together existing photos into a floor plan. And again, also one of the things where the human brain is really cool. Like, yeah, you show someone a listing of a house and you give them 20 photos, and a person can basically figure out like how to navigate the house. This door handles the other side of that, which leads to this outside there. This window looks to this other side. Like a human being can develop a pretty decent workable 3D model of how that house flows, which a computer can't do. They can do if you give them new pictures, but they can't do that with existing ones. So I don't think that I'll ever end up getting into homes. Where my business is going is that I am working with a number of very large developers who are trying to get like their first like few hundred units right that they're building in like a very large like master plan community. So that's kind of like the biggest developers that I'm working with. Some family offices and large developers here, both actually in the United States and in Canada. And I'm also working on some smaller projects with some developers who have maybe built single family homes before and have never built apartments. So they're like, my experience is half as like a floor plan data expert and half as like I am like by like background and disposition, like a developer at heart. So I know how to push that process generally through. So my customers fall into those two kind of like big camps. For people who are in the middle, who kind of generally already know what they're doing, the cost isn't really going to make sense. It makes sense, frankly, kind of at the two different extremes, where someone is doing a big enough project that they just want to get it right, and for someone who is newer, and that's the two largest buckets of my customers. In 4 months, I've done a few thousand, and I've got probably 2x that in the pipeline over the next few months on units to optimize.
That's amazing. Congrats.
Thank you.
Really, really impressive. And do you charge per unit, or do you forecast with data, of course, like an incremental? Do you not? I guess nothing is a guarantee, but with some degree of certainty that they'll likely get, $100, $200 more in rent. I'm wondering what that delta of increase based on your optimizations is, because there's obviously a pitch there to a developer to say, that this will make more sense, right? And then you mentioned finishings. I'm guessing you also recommend some style finishings besides layout.
No, I don't. Other people have that. I do not make recommendations on finish, I guess, other than like kind of obvious ones, but I don't have data on that because my floor plans do not catalog that, and other people have. So that's kind of like a separate, that'll be a separate project for someone else to work on. So that is not something that I specifically speak to. In terms of how my pricing works, I mean, the fun part of being at the earlier stage of this business is that I do not yet have a specific like flywheel on what works. So the pricing has been kind of has been a mixed bag. There's some projects where I have worked for a fee that I've contributed into the projects, which is fun and I've invested some more into some of them. So I've used them almost as like a way to find and identify the good projects to invest in. And then on other ones, it's been more, on some it's just been hourly consulting. And on some of them, it's been a very specific like scope-based fee. I do tie the pricing internally and in the way that I communicate it to people with like, obviously the crux of my value proposition is that by virtue of getting either my opinion or us working on something with my data, that they will either avoid designs that will lose money, and that they will ideally like make their designs better in order to increase rent. So rent is clearly the output. Rent per square foot is the main like thing that we're trying to optimize for, as that's tied to net operating income. So I'm definitely still early in the stage of growing this company. And I'm going to need to hire a few more people this in the next few months because I'm very behind with customers. I've sold far more than I'm delivering on, which is a good problem. as far as problems go, it's a better problem to have, but still, it's not good to have a less than satisfactory customer experience. But that is, I guess, like the growth trajectory that I'm generally on.
Yeah, I call it like a waiter with plates. So as you get more
Yeah.
orders, you're stacking on the plates. It is definitely a
Yes.
good problem. Not long term, I suppose, but it sounds like, you've come over the hurdle of, what's value add, what is your expertise you can use, and then,
Hmm.
where can you pitch it? And
Yep.
what's that turnaround cycle like? We'll just use like the estimated turnaround of like pitch to inking a deal to end product. So could you turn something around does it take weeks? Is it a back and forth diligence process? So, commercial real estate I hear is
Yep.
such a long and arduous process that I'm assuming, there's a lot of similar
Sort
things like
of.
that.
Sort of. So there isn't a specific. I'd say a lot of it is driven by like where things fall within the overall like, development cycle. So the primary value that I can give someone is that when they get initial unit concepts back from the architect, which is in the it's called the schematic or a design development phase of like architectural drawings, that's when you have more freedom to make different changes. So I'm not an architect, so I make recommendations based on where within individual submarkets their units are falling relative to like other sizes, and what seems to be going on in their market. So I'd say that the timing mostly depends on how quickly that kind of back and forth goes with their architects. There are some projects that I've done where the turnaround is like relatively short because all they want to do is say like, here's my floor plans, just like mark them up and, thanks very much. So that's pretty short and that's, a few days. There are some where it's longer, but it's not because my work is that long, although it can be longer. It's not because my work is that long because I already have the floor plans of most apartments in the US, and I already have like a lot of different like attributes already crunched. It's mainly because it fits into their development schedule, or it's more product of their development schedule, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And, once you have a roadmap of all the floor plans, do you
Hmm.
have dynamic input of pricing? So can you aggregate all the pricing on
No,
the
I
internet? Kind
I
of
do
wondering
not.
if
I do not
that's
have that. No, that is certainly somewhere where I'm gonna eventually go. Like, if this idea, which is fun and making good money now, is going to turn into something that's like hugely important, it's going to be through that kind of method that you mentioned of saying like, here's this data set, here are these column headers, let's plug rents into this and see how they dynamically work. That's a pretty tech heavy endeavor and would take a pretty significant investment to do that. So, if I'm right, I would certainly like to go that direction, and there's no reason why I shouldn't be involved in helping optimizing the pricing on every apartment in the world, or every apartment in the U.S. at least, which would be a very successful, very valuable company. But that's kind of have to be a second act. I would absolutely need to raise capital for that, maybe venture capital, maybe something else. But you know, for the time being, this is profitable and is growing very quickly, and so I'll just kind of ride that until either I make enough money from the profits, just invest that directly in and build the first bit of that product, or just decide that I need to go and raise capital and try and build that essentially software platform.
Yeah, totally. And when you get to the software platform side, what about anything like a marketplace where you can aggregate, you had done surveys for demand. What if you
Yep.
can actually funnel active buyers into, a network of floor plans that are on market or like coming to be built and then, or existing builds, and then also, you know, really with attribution, really find someone what they're looking for. Cause I think people who don't know what they're looking for, it's a process. And if you can condense
Yep.
that cycle down with some kind of certainty and, satisfaction, which you're very well aware of, you could
Yep.
quickly become the de facto place for someone to say, okay, find me a place, and then you connect them, the supply and demand side, and
Yep.
then all of a sudden, you take your 3-10% and off you go.
No, you're absolutely right. That is a I think that market still can be won, whether it's Zillow or apartments.com or Zumper or wherever else. I think where they struggle the most is in, to your point, like showing people what they want. And they can show people based on like, do you have a pet? Yes, great, filter out these. Like, do you want to have any washer and dryer? Yes, great, filter out those. Like, how many bedrooms do you want? ultimately what all those filters are about is like, can I live here? Right. And you can only filter, again, kind of going back to the data point of what you've measured. And so once you have enough data, and this is going to take a while, but once you have enough data and say like, all right, based on a unit being described with these like 100 different interior variables, this works well for families or roommates or someone who has this thing but wants like a very separate like special space in order to be able to like work from home. Like the more granular you can get, the better you should be able to serve up good suggestions. So I would say like whether this is going to be something that could improve existing products or be a new platform to try and take market share from those other ones. I don't know many people who find the filtering and search process through those other apartment websites to be a pleasant experience. There are some that are clearly better than others, but I don't think they're very good at recommending things. Yeah, they just aren't, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's the recommendations, it's the,
Yep.
the burden of, life is getting expensive. So,
Yep.
affordability. So, the student who's willing to room with people, or, do you walk, do you drive, what's a tolerable commute, that kind of stuff. All these little features, I guess. So, no, it's a very, very interesting thought process. So, love what you're doing. I think it's really
Thanks.
awesome. And, yeah, keep it up. It's really, really cool.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Bobby, got a question for you with regards to
Sure.
how do you gain customers? Do you approach them? Do they approach you? Is there a method that you can reach out to them? And obviously, I'm sure there's the word of mouth within the industry. People talk to each other, and then eventually gets the ball rolling, like you said, and quote unquote good problem to have, and being a bit overwhelmed with customers. But how does that happen? Because to me, it sounds like a bit of a no-brainer. Like if I was a developer, I would definitely love someone like you to work with on a project like this.
I appreciate you saying that. It is a somewhat unique thing. I'm not aware of anyone else who's selling this particular service. So, and since I'm this business of doing sales and doing these projects is 4 months old. Although the data set and the system that I think is many years old. So my customer demand at this point has come exclusively from inbound, and not only from Twitter, because I know other developers, and there's other people who I've worked with in a previous life who've asked for it. But I would say like 90% of it has come from either Twitter or someone from Twitter recommending that I talk to someone else. And so I have not had the problem yet of going out and finding customers, although I don't think that it'll be that difficult of a sale. Where I have needed to be careful is designs and pro forma are some of the most closely held information by other developers with good reason. So I will need to be very thoughtful about how I certainly protect everyone's information and no one sees anything else from any other project I've ever worked on. The service I know is in demand by everyone because, again, I don't think anyone else is selling it, and everyone who is building units has to make a choice on like how big the bedroom is relative to the rest of the apartment, and they just don't know. And they'd like someone to help them tell them. So the demand is there, where I think I will need to be thoughtful and careful going forward. It's like how to make sure that people don't feel that there is an inherent conflict of interest. I've certainly been approached by groups who've asked me to work with them exclusively. So that's kind of getting over that hump. But for the time being, that is not something that I've done.
Yeah. You almost have to set like a clause of a time frame, so you're not, it's not a 30-year exclusivity, but if someone wants to write you $1 million to $10 million check, then maybe there's a right price if you ask. But
there might be.
So I guess back to the security aspect. I guess there's a slight danger of like, you hire an intern who is like a secret agent for another developer who wants to take all the plans and off they go. So I guess there's some question marks there. But what exactly are you hiring for? So let's say someone listening or catches this on Twitter and says, I'd be good at that. Who are you hiring? If like, who's the ideal person? How would they help in the next couple months?
I don't have a good answer for that yet. It's certainly going to be someone who likes data and data problems. I don't think it needs to be a full-blown data scientist. So it's probably going to be someone more who's like of an analyst associate background and who I think thinks through data problems well. They may or may not need to be involved in real estate. I don't need anyone on the front end on sales since I can handle that. So I'd say there's going to be like, I've already hired someone to help with some of the back office stuff. There's going to be a software engineer, and I know there's going to be an analyst. In terms of what they're specifically tasked with doing, I'm not exactly sure yet, but those will be the two positions that need to be hired. They're both going to be relatively, neither one of them are going to need to be terribly experienced. Because to me, one of the cores of this business is like, I want to not like run lean, but like I want to optimize for like a profitability so that we can grow sustainably. So that's what I'm pushing for.
Yeah, it would be a shame if you pitch, higher rents to cover costs and then it doesn't
Yeah.
happen internally. Of course, you'll cover that. It makes a lot of sense. Love it. That's amazing. My eyes have been open to data and to you're really solving a valuable problem. I would say the demand's there. It's not a demand problem, right? It's just
Yep.
a time and scale. So, I mean,
Well, I mean,
what
and
is
the other problem is like being able to actually do what I say that I can, right? I do think that I'm thinking about the problem the right way. It is a very, very, very hard like data problem to solve because real estate data is very seasonal. It's hard to like compare units to each other. So I believe that these interior attributes matter. There are some things that I can show definitely matter, but other ones, data is a lot of something that's in the eye of the beholder. So it's one of the reasons why I advocate for this quite a bit within Twitter, and another reason why I use the moniker of Bill James. That like I believe that we're on the cusp of making interior data attributes like important, but also I think it could be something that just takes a very long time. In the way that there were people who were talking about breaking baseball down from wins into runs, into hits, into bases, into walks, right? Like people have been talking about that idea for 40 years. And it didn't catch on all the way, until the last 20. So I think that could be the direction we're going. And I also want there to be many more people who are smarter than me to start thinking about the problem in a similar way. Because I do know that I'm right on the approach. And I'm excited to see what other kinds of metrics people come up with to compare units to each other.
Yeah, right on. And is there any way to take existing buildings? So I don't know what the process is for renovating like a
Yep.
50-year-old building, 100-year-old building, but there's a lot of aged ones. And is a teardown required, or can you remap floor plans at all without affecting the structural integrity of these places?
I would say that depends on your feelings on furnished housing. That's how I would say the answer to that depends. So you can't, it's very difficult to like reconfigure existing residential buildings because plumbing stacks are where they are, and electrical is set generally where it's at. So you can't move things that much. There's also zoning issues on, you can't like just add unit count generally to buildings. So it's I think that you could do it through modifying some units with maybe with furniture, maybe with some other stuff, but it'll be a tricky thing. It is possible, but yeah, it'll be tricky, and it'll take some very creative construction.
Yeah, as a follow-up, what about the zoning of cities, at least for
Yep.
consultations? So why
Yep.
aren't cities hiring you to consult for just a quick overview of unit sizes in by
Yep.
square footage of how tall a building is and how much you can, pack in there? I think you'd be great at that. So, I mean, have you considered pitching them?
I have not considered them as customers. I do consider myself as an advocate for that. Again, it's similar to like you get more of what you measure. Cities are always talking about like average prices going up. They talk about, some big problems like gentrification and things like that. But when it comes to development, they almost always focus on like number of units coming online. And that's why one other thing that I've talked a lot about on Twitter is like, both for the sake of other competitors, and I think it should be helpful for cities, is if you focus on like the number of units that are being built rather than the makeup of the units that are there, you're missing, in my opinion, like a really big factor, right? In kind of the obvious example, right? Like a 250 unit building that has all 450 square foot one bedrooms changes the neighborhood differently than a 250 unit building that has like all three bedrooms. Now, where that doesn't change the difference is like if all the three bedrooms are built so that each one of those bedrooms is identically sized, because what they really mean is for that to be full of, 750 roommates, right? So that to me is like we're looking at the floor plans specifically provides a much better picture on like what's going on within a different city. So, well, I think that my method is one that would be useful for cities. I'm not sure if my data would be particularly helpful. It could be in that I could certainly give them an inventory of what the floor plans are like in their individual district, and we could come up with ideas on what it should be. but that might be slightly problematic. I don't know. Either way, I think that like cities should look at that and consider it. And I think it's also a really good, a much better way to think about affordability than just, raw unit count, because more luxury one bedrooms doesn't do anything to solve the problem of like expensive housing for families. Even if you're a pro developer, YIMBY person like I am, the one doesn't affect the other.
That's very insightful. So would you say developers have a huge hand in deciding how a city's development, whether consciously or unconsciously, based on, their own for-profit design patterns of these buildings, and then, the end result of all these developers will be how the flow of people move in and how many people end up staying in the city? It almost sounds like there's a causal relation there.
Oh, there absolutely is, and you have the other problem of like the general like economic problem of people acting not in concert with each other and with the same set of data, right? So someone comes in and they look at a city and they say, aha, like one bedroom rents, like we need to try and target one bedrooms that are this price. This is the highest like rent per square foot, build it, right? So I'd also encourage, if you look at the different units that are being built and you look at their floor plans, I would, dollars to donuts, I'd say like you'll find they be pretty dang similar, right? So one, like there's the problem of like people acting independently. And the other one is they act independently about thinking about like, well, what happens 5 years from now, right? There's all these units that are all the same that are built. Like, what's going to happen? Are there enough people to fill them? Okay, let's assume there are. You've significantly changed like the makeup of that individual neighborhood by, if you dump 10,000 new, urban size one bedrooms into a neighborhood, there are some cities where that's irrelevant because there's so many people there, it doesn't matter. But I think in almost every city, it'd have a pretty significant impact. And developers do have that impact. And frankly, I'd say like a very large percentage of the value that I give to other developers is to say like, let's look at what other people are building and let's look at what you're building and let's actually compare like your units to their units so that we aren't just like all building the exact same thing and then competing, for the same renters. And then the only differentiation is going to be price.
Yeah, no, I get it. And because there's that like symbiotic relationship, city and developers, because city approves and they are kind of forecasting, of course, how they want everything, whether it's like amount of housing or, lifestyle, remove a highway, add green space, all that kind of stuff. I think, there really would be a use case for someone like yourself to kind of liaise the two and consulting on both sides, just to almost also match. If developer wants to negotiate more units, you could almost be on the table banging your fist and pitching why that's important, or be a translator.
I think so. I hope so.
Yeah, it's amazing. Really, really cool. I just really loved the last hour of opening my mind to this, and appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely be following along and love to have you back as you hit some milestones. You're welcome back anytime. Do you have anything you want to pitch? Where can people find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter. So my handle is my name, at Bobby Fijan, BobbyFijan. My DMs are open, so I'd love to chat with anyone who cares about data or cares about floor plans. I do work on projects, so if you're a developer, whether you have a small project or whether you have something enormous or in between, I'm happy to give like quick feedback on floor plans. And if there's an opportunity for us to work together, I'd love that too. As I mentioned, I am going to be scaling up. So the people who I have been not as good at following up with, that should dramatically improve over the next few weeks and months. But I love floor plans, and I'd love to help anyone else who also loves floor plans.
Thanks so much.
No
love
problem.
the chat, and we'll be definitely following along.
Thank you. I appreciate the ability to kind of share what I love.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Talk to you soon. So with that said, let's wrap up today's episode. Thank you for listening to another episode of Methodical Millions, where you can better your future and better yourself.
Thanks, everyone.